I call the honourable member Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. New Zealanders should be proud of ACC. New Zealanders should be proud of a scheme that has lasted over decades. I do want to say this too. So Owen Woodhouse is a great New Zealander, a fantastic New Zealander, and the National Party were the people that he had to really convince about establishing ACC. He had some alignment with them, I think, at the time, but he is the person that they had to be convinced about having the scheme. And New Zealanders should be incredibly proud, Mr. Speaker, of a 24/7 no-fault scheme. The scheme that's the envy of the world, the PricewaterhouseCoopers report that came out and said that this scheme is the envy of the world. And yet this government has systematically trashed the reputation of ACC. From the moment they got into office, Mr. Speaker, they have systematically trashed the reputation of ACC. And we've been over it once already in this debate, but we need to go over it again. What the government did on first coming into office was manufacture a crisis in ACC. That is what they did when they first came in. And the Honourable Nick Smith stands up and says in the House, and he reads out the numbers that were going on in ACC's accounts at the Times, conveniently forgetting something that Mr English likes to bring up from time to time, a little matter called the global financial crisis, and what was happening, the GFC, thank you, not to be confused with the GC, Mr Mallard's favourite show, the GFC. This is what actually caused those problems for ACC, but Dr Smith doesn't want to hear about that. Dr Smith only wants to hear about the fact that he can't be held responsible, or he can't take any of the blame for what happened in ACC. But the truth is, a financial crisis was manufactured in ACC, and the people who bore the brunt of that were the levy payers right across this country, the employees, the employers right across this country. They're the people who bore the brunt of Nick Smith's manufactured crisis. In the meantime, he sacked the board of ACC that he inherited and began the planning for privatisation. And let's not forget, hearing David Bennett stand up and tell us what National cares about with ACC, the plan of this party, the National Party, is to privatise ACC. That is the plan of the National Party. That's actually, for once, that's actually what the National Party went to the country and said before the election. They've done it once before, Mr Bennett. The track record's there in the 90s. We had to come in and reverse it. They were planning it again. The privatisation agenda is what Nick Smith was setting up. He manufactured the crisis, he sacked the board, and he began bringing in people who would implement the privatisation agenda. And every electorate MP, Mr Speaker, in this House knows what happened after the 2008 election, because the number of ACC cases went up. And the reason those cases kept coming in the door of MPs' offices is because the national government's agenda for ACC, the privatisation agenda, was put in play. And so we had the assessments that began to talk about the existing injuries that people had, no matter that they had nothing to do with the new injuries that people had, and people were turned down. I went with constituents to help them, as a constituent MP, to help them prepare their cases, because there was nobody out there that could do it for them. These were people who were genuinely injured. And as a constituent MP right across this parliament, we know what happened there. And then we had the disgraceful case of people who were victims of sexual abuse who had their counselling support taken away. A disgraceful situation that this national government has never fully taken responsibility for, and that was Nick Smith as well. We've also seen it with hearing impairment as well. Disentitlement, Mr Speaker. That is the legacy of this government when it comes to ACC. It's not something to be proud of on the other side of the House. Disentitlement. Taking away from people what they were entitled to. Taking away what New Zealanders were entitled to when we gave up the right to sue. When we said we will have this scheme that will protect us all, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And this government comes along with its agenda to privatise and takes away entitlements from people. It is a disgrace, Mr Speaker. But then it carried on from there under this government. They moved on from the privatisation agenda to undermining ACC itself, cutting staff, and then we had the situation with Nick Smith and his letters on behalf of Bronwyn Puller. And let's be absolutely clear, Mr Speaker, what that looked like was that if you knew someone in the National Party, you'd get treated differently in ACC. That's what it looked like, and that's the perception New Zealanders had. If you knew someone in the National Party, things would be different for you in ACC. And writing letters as a minister on ministerial letterhead that endorses a claimant, talks about the ability of a claimant to return to work. What is one of ACC's main issues and interests? The ability of someone to return to work, and that's what Nick Smith wrote about. So for Nick Smith to stand up in this House today, Mr. Speaker, and refuse again to accept responsibility for what he did shows that he should not return to Cabinet, because he clearly has not learned the lesson of what happened there. Mr. Speaker, the saddest thing of all of this is that this government is so totally distracted by scandals and mismanagement and cronyism, they are letting go one of the great things that New Zealand has in ACC, let alone the fact that they're not at all focused on trying to grow the economy or any small matters like that. They are so focused on their own mismanagement, on their own cronyism within this organisation, they are completely distracted, and ACC is in trouble as a result. Mr. Speaker, the Minister spoke of the need for a culture change within ACC. And there's many of us on this side of the House who would agree that there are aspects of the way things have gone in ACC that they would like to see changed. But the Minister's idea of a culture change and our idea on this side of the House of a culture change are very different things. Because the culture change that the Minister is talking about is a culture change towards more privatisation. That's the culture change the Minister means. She doesn't mean a culture change where we get back to the default assumption being that somebody who comes before ACC is a New Zealand citizen who has a right to the entitlements that ACC offer. Yes, there will be people who try and rip the system off, and we should root out those people and make sure that they don't get their claims fulfilled. But the vast majority of New Zealanders who come before ACC come because they have been hurt or injured, and they expect ACC to be able to provide the support and the services that they need. The culture change this Minister wants is to take more entitlements away, to have a greater role for the Australian insurance companies who benefited the last time when the National Party wanted to privatise ACC. That's who will benefit. The interests here are not those New Zealanders who get hurt or injured or their families. The interests being perpetuated by the National Party are the Australian insurance companies who will benefit from privatisation. So the culture change that this government wants is not the same culture change that we want. We want a culture change that sees ACC back to its core principles, back to the Woodhouse principles, the things that make New Zealanders proud. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? We know where this culture change is heading because of who the government has decided to put in place to run ACC now, and that is Paula Rebstock. Paula Rebstock, the go-to person for the National Party. The person who the National Party is turning to as they look at their agenda of welfare reform, as they look at their agenda of undermining social security in this country, they bring her in as well to look at ACC. They bring her in to oversee what's happening in ACC. Further proof, Mr. Speaker, that the culture of change that this government is looking for is a culture of change that is around putting privatisation in place. Mr. Speaker, this is a distracted, out-of-touch government. These are people who no longer understand why they were elected to promote ACC, to promote the well-being of New Zealanders. They have got themselves so mired in scandal and cronyism. We have a minister now of ACC who is incapable of dragging ACC back to where it should be. This government needs to get New Zealanders in a position where they can be proud of ACC again. At the moment, they cannot be, because this government has mismanaged ACC, it has manufactured a crisis, and it has introduced cronyism into one of the most important institutions in our land. They should be ashamed of themselves. ACC is in a shambles, and it is this government's fault.
I call the honourable member